Michael Jordan quietly paid off a teammate's mother's medical bills. 20 years later, the truth came out. The podcast studio lights buzzed overhead as Derek West adjusted his mic. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and fresh gear. Across from him sat the host, a lean guy in his 30s with thick glasses and a voice that dripped with curiosity. The podcast was called Legends Unfiltered, and today's guest had more to say than he'd ever let slip on air. "You good to go?" the host asked, checking levels. Derek nodded, leaning back in his seat. "Let's make it real." The interview began with light stories, old locker room laughs, Scotty's dry humor, Rodman's wild routines, Phil's calm in the storm. Then, it shifted. "You ever have a moment during your time with the Bulls when you almost walked away?" That hit different. Derek looked down, twisted the ring on his finger, a modest gold band with a red stone. Then he exhaled. "Yeah. 96, right before the playoffs." "You? Walk away?" "You were part of the second three-peat machine." "I wasn't the machine," Derek said, his voice low. "I was the dust caught in the gears. People think just because you wore the jersey, you had it made. But behind the scenes? I was drowning." He wasn't exaggerating. Back in 1996, Derek was a 24-year-old guard barely scraping minutes on the Bulls bench. He'd been drafted out of NC State, known more for his grit than talent. His contract was the league minimum, and he knew it. The moment he slowed down, he'd be replaced. Off the court, life was worse. His mom, Angela, was in the ICU back in Charlotte. Cancer. Late stage. No insurance. The bills were mounting too fast. He tried to keep it quiet. Every game, he'd suit up like everything was fine. But he'd sleep in the locker room sometimes, just to cry into his towel without anyone seeing. He did what he could. Sent checks. Talked to doctors between practice and games. But every call from home felt heavier. That March, after a win against Miami, Derek sat alone on the bench long after the crowd left. The United Center was dark except for the emergency lights and faint sound of the cleaning crew. Jordan walked past him, headed toward the locker room, but stopped. "You good?" Jordan asked, casually, like someone asking if you needed water. Derek nodded. "Yeah. Just tired." Jordan didn't press. Just stared at him for a second longer than expected, then kept walking. The next morning, Derek got a call. The hospital bills had been paid in full. Over 60 grand wiped away. Anonymous donor. He stood there in his hotel room, stunned, holding the phone like it might speak again. He asked around. Nobody owned up to it. Not the front office, not Phil, not his agent. He assumed it was someone from the league, maybe a Bulls exec trying to keep morale high. That day at practice, Jordan didn't say a word to him. Just played hard as always. But something about the way he passed him the ball in a drill, precise, sharp, confident, felt different. Like he was saying, "Now handle yours." Derek stayed on the team, kept grinding. Angela pulled through treatment. She got better. And he never brought it up again. Until now. Back in the studio, the host leaned in, eyebrows raised. "So you never knew who did it?" "Not back then." "And now?" Derek hesitated. "I have my answer. But I didn't confirm it until 2 decades later." The host didn't push. He knew how to let tension breathe. Derek continued. "I stayed in the league 2 more years. Then I retired. Quiet. No farewell tour, no big announcement. I went home. I coached kids, ran clinics. Made sure they learned how to fight for what they want without losing who they are. That was enough for me. But something changed recently, right?" "Yeah. Last year. Reunion game. Jordan was there. Still sharp, still MJ. We talked. Not about basketball. About life. My mom." He remembered her name. What did he say? Derek looked straight into the camera lens. He said, "You did good, West. You had weight on your back and you still ran the floor. That's rare." Then he patted my shoulder and walked away. That's it? That's it. But it was enough. The host sat in silence for a second. Then nodded. That's wild, man. Just thinking MJ did that and never took credit. Derek leaned forward. See, that's the part people miss. He wasn't trying to be known for it. He wasn't trying to be liked. He just did it. And walked away. That's real. He sat back, eyes heavy with memories. You know what I learned? You don't measure greatness by what someone says at a mic. You measure it by the quiet stuff. The stuff no one claps for. The host tapped his notepad, smiling. This episode's gonna blow up. Derek shook his head. That's not why I shared it. I've seen too many kids thinking they gotta be loud to matter. Gotta post every good deed. Jordan never said a word. Not for 20 years. That's a kind of strength we don't talk about. The studio fell quiet again. The host eventually gave the wrap-up sign. As the outro music played, Derek removed his headphones. He stood up, stretched his back, and looked out the small studio window at the city skyline. 20 years ago, he'd sat alone on a bench wondering if he could hold it all together. Today, he just let the world in on the secret that helped him survive. And the story had only just begun. The podcast episode dropped the next morning and exploded faster than anyone expected. Clips circulated everywhere: Twitter, sports blogs, YouTube. Headlines spun fast: Jordan's quiet gift, the GOAT with a heart, ex-Bull reveals MJ's secret act of kindness. Derek didn't check his phone much. He wasn't doing it for fame. In fact, he hated attention. He'd done his time in the league, faded out quietly, and liked it that way. Still, the calls came. Former teammates. Reporters. Old coaches. Even a few celebrities. Most asked the same thing: did MJ really do that? Derek gave them the same answer: he never admitted it. He never had to. The story wasn't just about money. It was about what happened when someone saw your struggle and chose not to ignore it. A few days later, Derek drove across town to the youth center where he coached. It was early evening, and the court was packed with kids. Some wore worn-out shoes, others had taped-up fingers, but they all played like something big was on the line. That's what Derek loved most, seeing hunger in their eyes, not ego. He sat on the bleachers and watched the game unfold. His assistant, Jamal, leaned over with a grin. "You went viral, coach." Derek chuckled. "Guess people still care about the truth." Jamal nodded. "And Jordan? You think he'll ever talk about it?" "He doesn't need to. He already said what mattered." That night, after practice, Derek unlocked the back office and went through some old boxes. One was filled with team memorabilia, photos, programs, ticket stubs. He pulled out a framed photo of the '96 championship team. There they all were: Jordan, Pippen, Kerr, Rodman, Harper, and somewhere in the back, partially hidden, himself. He stared at it for a moment. That year was both the peak and the pressure. Back then, Angela, his mother, was his entire world. A single mom who worked 2 jobs, never missed a high school game, and somehow always had enough energy to cheer like it was Game 7 of the finals. When her diagnosis hit, it tore through him. She hadn't told him right away. Didn't want to distract him. But by the time he found out, the cancer had already advanced. He remembered that night in the hotel room like it happened yesterday. His hands shaking. The bills laid out on the bed like landmines. He was a second-year player with barely any savings, no guarantee of a long career. Every day felt like it could be his last in the league. He remembered the conversation with her that nearly broke him. "Ma, I can't do both," he'd said, his voice cracking. "I can't keep playing like nothing's wrong." Her voice came through strong on the other end. You don't quit, baby. You hear me? You play. Let me worry about this. But she couldn't worry about it. She didn't have the means. Neither did he. Then, just like that, it was gone. The debt. The weight. No name attached, no string pulled. Just mercy. The next morning, Phil Jackson called him into the office. Derek expected a trade or maybe a benching. Instead, Phil said, whatever you're dealing with, channel it. You're stronger than you think. He didn't understand it at the time. Now it made more sense. A week later, back in present day, Derek got an unexpected call from Ronnie Miller, a former Bulls staffer who worked in team logistics back in the 90s. They hadn't talked in years. You still in Chicago? Ronnie asked. I am. You got a minute? I've been thinking about what you said in that podcast. They agreed to meet at a quiet diner outside the city. No cameras, no fans. Ronnie showed up older, grayer, but still sharp. I've been meaning to say this for years, he said over coffee. Back in '96, I was the one who processed a wire transfer for the team. Unusual request. It came from a name I hadn't seen before, the J. Thompson. Derek froze. I thought it was a league error. But the memo on the bank file said Angela W., full coverage. That's all. MJ had used that alias a few times for low-profile stuff, tickets for kids, bills for staff. But this one? It was different. Bigger. Derek sat in silence. I confronted him once, Ronnie added. Asked why he didn't just let people know. You know what he said? What? He said, some things are better when they're just between you and God. Derek nodded slowly. It all made sense now. Jordan never wanted thanks. Never wanted a spotlight. He wanted to act, then disappear into the noise. Why are you telling me now? Derek asked. Because the world's loud these days. People forget what real help looks like. You shared the story without pointing fingers or chasing fame. That's rare. Thought you deserved to know the whole picture. They shook hands, and Derek left feeling lighter. 2 days later, he visited his mother's grave. She passed away in 2017, peacefully, at home, cancer long gone. He knelt, brushed some leaves off the stone, and placed a photo there. It was of him and Jordan in the locker room, arms around each other after the '96 championship. I found out, he said, voice soft. Took me 20 years, but I found out. He stayed there for a while. Not in mourning, but in gratitude. The next practice at the youth center, Derek gathered the kids in a huddle. Let me tell you something, he said. Success doesn't mean anything if you can't lift someone else while you're climbing. The kids listened, wide-eyed. There was a time I thought I couldn't go on. Someone made sure I could. Didn't ask for credit. Didn't need applause. Just did it. One of the kids raised a hand. Who was it? Derek smiled. Someone who knew the value of silence. And with that, he blew the whistle, and practice began. He didn't need to say Jordan's name. The lesson was already loud enough. The weeks passed, and the podcast didn't fade. It kept growing. People started talking, not just about Jordan, but about quiet acts of sacrifice, the kind that didn't need to be televised. Derek got invited to interviews, panels, even a guest spot on a morning sports show. He turned most of them down. He wasn't interested in fame. He had practice at 5. One crisp Friday evening, he got a letter in the mail. Real paper, not email. The envelope had no return address, just a Chicago postmark. Inside was a short note, handwritten in clean, sharp letters. Glad you made it through. The game's bigger than any one of us. You kept playing. That's all that matters. MJ. There was no signature, no call for attention. Just words. And for Derek, it was enough. For 20 years, he'd carried the weight of that gift without knowing who to thank. Now, he could finally breathe. At the youth center, things changed. More kids showed up. Local businesses offered to sponsor shoes and gear. A few former players reached out, asking if they could visit, maybe run a clinic. It wasn't about the podcast, it was about the spirit behind it. One afternoon, Derek was taping up a net when a young boy named Theo approached. Skinny, maybe 11. Wore the same shirt 3 days in a row, but played like he had something to prove. "Coach?" Theo asked. "Yeah, bud? I heard you knew Michael Jordan." Derek grinned. "Played with him. Is it true he gave you money when your mom was sick?" Derek squatted down to Theo's level. "It's true he helped. But not with money. With belief." Theo frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when someone helps you without asking for credit, they're not just giving you something, they're showing you that you matter. Even when the world thinks you're invisible." Theo nodded slowly, like he was absorbing more than just the words. Derek stood up, patted the boy's shoulder. "Now go run drills. You've got hustle in your bones." That night, Derek stayed late, locking up the gym. He walked the court alone, listening to the echo of his own steps. He remembered his own feet on the Bulls' hardwood, far fewer minutes, sure, but they counted. Because someone saw him when it mattered. Later that month, the Bulls held a reunion event for the '96 team. Most of the guys came: Pippen, Kerr, Longley, Harper. Jordan showed too, fashionably late, with his usual cool quietness. The event was classy, not flashy. Speeches, handshakes, media photos. Derek stood in the back at first, trying to blend in. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. "You still coaching?" came Jordan's voice. "Every day. Kids need that." Derek turned. "I finally got your note." Jordan gave the slightest nod. "Figured it was time. You saved my family, man. I never got to say it. You just did." They stood in silence for a moment, then Jordan broke into a slight grin. "You still can't shoot." Derek laughed. "I stopped pretending." Before Jordan walked away, Derek said, "Why'd you do it?" "Back then." Jordan didn't turn around. "Because someone once did it for me. And that was that." A few months later, Derek received a package at the youth center. Inside was a vintage pair of Jordan 11s, worn, scuffed, but signed. Not for auction. Just a note attached, for the next kid who thinks the world's against him. Derek put them in a glass case and mounted them on the gym wall. Years passed. The story became a local legend. New kids came and went, but the lesson stayed. They didn't all know basketball history. They didn't all know what Jordan did. But they learned the value of showing up, staying humble, and helping when no one's watching. One rainy night, after closing up the gym, Derek drove out to the old neighborhood. He parked in front of his mother's old house, long since sold, and just sat there for a while. He didn't need to knock. He didn't need to go in. The place lived in his memory exactly the way it was, curtains half drawn, Angela humming old gospel songs in the kitchen, the scent of cornbread filling the air. He whispered a quiet thank you and drove home. 10 years after the podcast aired, Derek retired from coaching. Not because he was tired, but because it was time to pass the whistle. His top assistant, Jamal, took over the program. On Derek's last day, the kids threw him a surprise farewell. They decorated the gym with banners that read, "Thank you, Coach." They gave him a plaque, a signed ball, and a framed photo of the 1996 Bulls with Derek circled in red marker, "That's our guy." During the final speech, Derek stood in the center of the court. "I'm not a legend," he said. "I'm not a Hall of Famer. But I learned from the best. And the best don't just play the game, they make sure someone else can too." He paused. You don't always know whose life you're saving. Sometimes, not even they know. So do the right thing anyway. Do it quietly. Do it strong. Do it without waiting for applause. The crowd clapped. Some cried. Theo, now 17 and on his way to college with a full scholarship, hugged him last. "You were my Jordan," he whispered. Derek smiled. "Then make sure you're somebody else's." Outside the gym, the night was cool. The stars barely showed, but they were there, quiet and distant, yet constant. Just like the people who help us without needing credit. Just like the ones who leave the court, but not the impact. As Derek locked up for the final time, he looked back at the glass case on the wall. The shoes still sat there. Old. Scuffed. Priceless. The note beside them said it all. Some things are better when they're just between you and God. And in that silence, everything was said.